The anchor's views and statements on the preceding program does not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Zamboanga State College of Marine Sciences and Technology, Philippine Broadcasting Service, Marine and News FM Management and staff.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. To my participants and audience over the net, good afternoon to all of you. Your resource speaker for this afternoon is the educational background of your resource speaker. Okay, of course, this is about me. Okay, good again. Good afternoon once again. So that is your resource speaker for this afternoon, who will be discussing to you about terrorism and national security. Now, national security is very vital and important, especially in the governance of any republic. So we have to discuss this as to the level of understanding of being a student. So first, let me tell you what is threat to national security. Actually, we have identified several people or groups of people who are threat to national security. But let us first define what is threat to national security. A threat to national security is the threat to the sovereignty and integrity of a particular nation by toppling present set of government by a threat groups considered as political enemy of the state, like the MILF, the MNLF, the Miswari group, and the communist terrorists and organized crime groups. So basically, those are groups that are influencing threat to national security. But there are two dimensions of threat to national security. We have the external and the internal threats. Now, what do we understand by external threats? This is a threat posed by aggressions of a foreign country to another country. One of the examples of this threat is our conflict with China, especially on the southern Philippine Sea, wherein we have a conflict between conflict of territory. In fact, it is not only the Philippines that is being affected with this conflict, but also other countries who has a claim over the area. Then the other one is threat to internal security. What do we understand about internal? So internal, that means it is just within our own territory. It is a threat posed by a political enemy of the state whose aim is to topple present set of government like the MILF, the MNLF, the Communist Party of the Philippines, and the organized Abu Sayyaf group who are engaged in large-scale criminal activities. But if we talk about MILF, why we considered MILF as a threat to national security? Because the very purpose of the MILF is to separate Mindanao from the Republic of the Philippines. Kaya nga ngayon, mayroon tayong tinatawag na BARM or the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao. So ito ngayon yung kiniklaim nila dati, that they want to have an autonomy over the Philippine Republic. So in doing so, they were engaged in criminal activities like bombings and other forms of terroristic activities. So what is this Moro Islamic Liberation Front? The objective of the Islamic Liberation Front is to establish Islamic State in Mindanao. Now, our experience on this is what we have suffered during the Marawi siege. Actually, it is penetrated or perpetrated by a group of terrorist group who wanted to make Marawi as one of the Islamic State. So, ito yung pumapasok yung threat to national security. Now, what are the tactics of the MILF? The tactics of the MILF when they were considered as threat to national security is to establish alliance with the communist terrorist movement and other threat groups. Dati there was a report that the MILF was establishing an alliance to the communist terrorists of the Philippines. So nag-establish sila ng alliance in order that they will have a more strength, more power than to fight against the government. Other tactics that they undertake is conduct of dialogue in Muslim areas to get support. So makikita natin na the activities of the MILF are just practically confined in the Muslim areas. Then they also uses peace talk as leverage to get their demands. If you remember, the MILF has entered a peace agreement with the government of the Republic of the Philippines for several instances until such time that there was a passage of the Bangsamoro law. Then other tactics being engaged by the MILF is mobilize populace during the armed offensive. So, ginagamit nila yung kapwa nila Muslims in order to have a armed confrontation with the government. Now, let me cite you an example of what had happened in Mama Sapano way back in the couple of years, wherein the Special Action Force of the Philippine National Police had really suffered a lot of casualties because they get into the area where the populace were also supporting the terrorist group. Then uses specialized units by using other names to conduct atrocities. Here are some strategies of the MILF that because they have entered into a peace agreement with the government, they are using subgroups in order to perpetrate criminal activities like kidnapping for ransom, extortion, hostage taking, and the like. Any criminal activities in order for them to be able to get money. Then they generate funds through extortion, business ventures, and kidnapping for ransom and robbery holdup. So these are their activities, these are their tactics. Now, diversions of the internal revenue allotment of the government. Now, sometimes there are reports that DMILF is compelling government LGUs to pay revolutionary taxes with them. So, some of the internal revenue allotment intended for the local government unit were they were diverted to the MILF use. Then they also conduct training to new members. So these are their tactics. In fact, most of the activities that they are undertaking training is somewhere in Central Mindanao. So doon talaga mafe-feel natin that MILF hardcore group or the impact of their atrocities is practically in Central. What are the areas affected by their operations? So we have identified areas that are affected of their operations. First, we have Basilan, the Basilan Island, and then we have also Zamboanga del Sur, then part of Zamboanga del Norte, then Zamboanga Sibugay, Lanao del Norte, Lanao del Sur, where Marawi is located. Then we have also in Maguindanao. Then we have Cotabato, Sultan Kudarat, South Cotabato, Sarangani, Davao Oriental, and Davao del Sur. So these are basically areas that are being affected by the atrocities and threat of the MILF. What are their propaganda? Of course, any group who wanted to topple a government have their different propaganda. But the MILF is not much extensive as the CPP-NPA because the CPP-NPA is more felt by the community. Now, their propaganda most likely is to post more articles and interviews, public comments and internet website. So they have also used the social media in order to propagate whatever their intent to our government. They continue to intensify informations and consultation drives aimed at getting the views of each members and local Muslim communities on the issues of ancestral domain. So what is really the issue that is being addressed by the MILF is yung ancestral domain, because they are claiming that Mindanao is owned by the Muslims. They are claiming that the owner of Mindanao is their forefathers that are dominated by Muslims. So they are using these issues in order to achieve, or in order to be able to get some support from their Muslim communities. Now, they engages in dialogue with leaders of the IPs, or the indigenous peoples of the Philippines. Then, their areas of recruitment and training is practically in Maguindanao, Sharif Kabunsuan, Lanao del Sur, Sibugay, Basilan. Of course, these are the areas that were reported before, but there are already changes. But again, because we have entered into peace agreement with the MILF, there is another group that emerged. Parang nag-defect sa grupo nila, which is the BIFF. The MILF also linkages are the Special Operations Group that continue to conduct joint training with Jama'ah Islamiyah and other foreign jihadis. What is this Jama'ah Islamiyah? Jama'ah Islamiyah is a terrorist group coming from the Middle East, coming from the Arab countries, and came into the Philippines and trained our local terrorists, our own homegrown terrorists. Then we have also the militant Balik Islam, or the Muslim converts like the Raja Sulaiman Islamic Movement. This, to give you a brief history of what is this Raja Sulaiman Islamic Movement, this was actually organized somewhere in northern Luzon. This was initiated by a Muslim convert who is a Pampangueño and then turned into an Islam, and then he organizes his own movement somewhere in northern Luzon. Then one of the significant activities of terroristic activities they have undertaken was the bombing. I think that's way back, wherein they bombed the metro rail transit in Manila. So other bombings taken place in Manila. So ito yung mga linkages ng Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Then what about their support? Where they get their support and their logistics? Some of the identified sources of their supports and logistics is through zakat collection locally and from Muslim OFWs or from foreign Islamic NGOs. So kaya nga binabantayan palagi ng ating government forces yung mga other organization, Muslim organizations. Kaya nga it is being misunderstood by some other Muslim groups that this group is engaged in terroristic activities, because lahat ng mga collection nila that are coming from abroad are through these mga foundations that are here in the Philippines. So isa yan sa mga reported ways of supporting their activities. Now, another sources of their logistics and support is extortion. The extortion is taking place of extorting money from big businessmen like yung the fishermen, like yung may mga plantations. So they extort money from there. Then another reported sources of their logistical support is the kidnapping for ransom activities, operations. So nakikita nyo naman in Sulu area, in Basilan, in Zamboanga Peninsula, lots of KFR or kidnapping for ransom operations were undertaken. Especially in the Triple SB, there were rampant of reports before that there are kidnapping for the purpose of generating funds in order to support their activities. Cattle rustling is another illegal or another form of extorting or sourcing out operational and financial support. Cattle rustling and illegal logging. Ito naman cattle rustling and illegal logging is so much felt here in Zamboanga Peninsula and as well as in Basulta area. But this cattle rustling and illegal logging is so much felt in Lanao area and in Maguindanao. Then we have also smuggling and drug trafficking. As reported that they also engage in smuggling and drug trafficking. Then sometimes they go to illegitimate ventures, business ventures. But actually that is some sort of laundering money from illegal sources into a legitimate business venture. But actually it is supporting their movement. Then another threat group is the Abu Sayyaf group. So Abu Sayyaf group is very known here in Zamboanga Peninsula. So what are the activities of the Abu Sayyaf group? The group was founded by Abdul Razzaq Abu Bakar Janjalani. So, pero ito si Abu Bakar Janjalani was the founder of this group, and then he was succeeded by his brother Jeffrey Janjalani, and then later on nagkaroon na sila ng kwan hanggang na-neutralize ito, then nagkaroon sila ng subgroups. But mainly the purpose of this Abu Sayyaf group is they are exposed to Al-Qaeda terror network, a militant Islamic group in Afghanistan. Ito namang Al-Qaeda terror group, of course, alam naman natin na these are militant groups in Afghanistan where the Abu Sayyaf had established linkages. What are the activities of the Abu Sayyaf? Mainly, they engage in extortions, bombings, kidnapping for ransom. Bombing, they are sometimes being also reported as being used by some political leaders in order to pursue their political career. So kaya nga there are some identified motives that came out in the investigation that the cause of the bombing or the purpose of the bombing is because they were being hired by some political leaders. Then they also engage in trainings of IED. What is this IED all about? Yan yung tinatawag natin na improvised explosive device or commonly known as homemade bombs. Homemade bombs. They also engage in sniper's course. So, religious indoctrinations. So, nagkaroon din sila ng recruitment through religious indoctrinations and specialized courses like sniping. And hindi lang ito ang Abu Sayyaf that are involved in this kind of specialized trainings, but all other threat groups that are operating in Zamboanga Peninsula or in southern Mindanao. In fact, our experience way back in 2013, September, wherein here in Zamboanga, we experienced the siege way back in 1913, wherein generally, most of the casualties incurred by the government forces, it's because of sniping. So kaya karamihan ng mga casualty ng government forces natin are because of the snipers that were fielded in the different strategic location in Riondo, Santa Barbara, Santa Catalina, Arena Blanco, Mampang. But the gravity of the force was the center of gravity was somewhere in Santa Barbara in Rio Hondo, wherein most of the government forces suffered casualties because of these snipers. But nevertheless, there were counter snipers that were also employed by the government, so nagkaroon ng neutralization. Now, what are the strategy and tactics of this Abu Sayyaf? The Abu Sayyaf is utilize recruits from a madrasa, meaning a Muslim school. So they are recruiting from the madrasas. Train on terrorist skills. What are those terrorist skills? Like bombing, kidnapping, extorting. So those are their basic skills. Gain wider audience through foreign terror allies and promoting jihad. So they have also established alliance with the international terrorist group. Seek funds and logistics from Muslim community abroad. So, yung mga sources naman ng mga pondo nila, aside from the funds that they have generated out of the kidnapping for ransom, is they also seek funds and logistics from the Muslim community in abroad. Now, another strategy and tactics that they are employing is demolition trainings is employed by political warlords to undertake bombing against political and personal enemies. So again, as I said, there are sometimes the Abu Sayyaf groups serve as a gun for hire or being hired by some unscrupulous political leaders in order, especially during elections. Then the fundings and logistics of the Abu Sayyaf were coming from kidnapping for ransom. So basically, ito yung pinaka sources of fundings nila, yung kidnapping for ransom. Kaya nga, way back in the 90s and towards the early year 20s, nakita natin yung consecutive kidnapping for ransom activities. Then, they have also the zakat collections from the Muslim community. And again, extortion is their means of fundings. So, they extort mga malakihang fishing companies that are operating in the high seas of Zamboanga Peninsula. Then they also extort or source fundings and logistics from the GI and other Islamic group. So yung mga yung other ka-alliance nila na mga terrorist group. Then again, there was report that the Abu Sayyaf was engaged in the distribution of illegal drugs. So these are their sources of fundings. Then we come now to the Moro National Liberation Front or the Miswari group. The breakaway from the first separatist group who wanted to establish Islamic State in Mindanao, or the MNLF Miswari group. Their resources, ano ba talaga ang purpose din ng the Miswari group? Again, the MNLF was the first organization or the separatist organization who wanted to moving for a separations of Mindanao from the Republic of the Philippines. But then, during the long struggle, the MILF defected from the group of Miswari, and kaya nga Hashim Salamat came into picture with the MILF as the founder of the MILF. Now, what are the sources of the MILF? From the sources of logistics. The group depends on zakat collection from OFW. Again, their sources of income or fund generation is coming from the overseas Filipino workers who are working abroad. Extortions and robbery. So, again, another mode of generating funds is through extortion and robbery. And who are those targets are the big businessmen operating in the peninsula and other big fishing companies that are operating in the high seas of Zamboanga Peninsula. The political leaders who are former members of the MLF. Now, the MNLF has started way back in 1970s. Now, because of so many process of peace talks, other members of the leaders of the MNLF have laid down and ventured into getting into political activities. So some of them were appointed politically, and some of them is already holding a positions in the government. So, but then there were reports that they are still supporting the movement. What are their strategy and tactics that are employed in order to pursue? First, they get mass-based support from Miswari's followers in Sulu. So the center of gravity of the MLF group is in Sulu. Kaya nga, if you can take note, the center of gravity for the MILF is in central Mindanao, and the center of gravity of the MNLF is in Basulta area or in Sulu. It's because, of course, Miswari has a Taos of blood, and Hashim Salamat is a Maranao. So medyo hindi sila nagkaintindihan. Kaya nga si Hashim Salamat defected from the group of Miswari. But they were all together when they started this separatist movement. Then they're still capable of launching armed operations. The group exploit religious and familial ties, particularly with the ESG. So may tie-up din sila sa ESG. Kaya nga kung minsan, pag nahuli ang isang ESG, sasabihin nila na MNLF sila. Pag nahuli naman sila as MNLF, sasabihin nila na MILF sila. So ganun lang sila, na pabalik-balik. They are just transcending from one group to the other group. Then they also engage in guerrilla tactics in inflicting government casualties. What do we understand about guerrilla tactics? They don't really engage frontally with the government. What they do is a guerrilla tactics wherein they hit and withdraw, hit and withdraw, hit and withdraw until they can or they will be able to inflict casualties on the government. So these are their tactics that are being employed. Then disperse rapidly and split up into small groups and mix up with Muslim communities once engaged. So in Basilan, kaya nga sabi nga nila, bakit sa tagal-tagal ng pag-aaway ng government forces against the Abu Sayyaf or MNLF, hindi pa rin nananalo-nalo ang government? Because one of the tactics employed by the MNLF is once they engage with the government, and the moment they cannot resist the force of the government, they split up and join with the ordinary families or ordinary Muslim citizens or Muslim residents in the area. So, pag nag-mix up na sila, the same strategy also being employed by the CPP-NPA, na pag na-engage sila at hindi nila kaya i-resist ang pwersa ng gobyerno, nakihalubilo sila sa community wherein wala na namang magawa ang gobyerno kasi they are back purely as a civilians. Then other tactics and strategies by the MNLF is tactical alliance with the Abu Sayyaf by providing sanctuary during tactical engagement with government. So how is it providing sanctuary? Now the MNLF as a separatist group was recognized by the government, kaya nga nagkaroon sila ng pistok noong unang araw, and then they claim some areas as MNLF territory. So pag na-claim na, approve ng government yan, na pag MNLF territory, the government will not harass or attack or recover the area because it is embodied in the peace talk agreement. So ang ginagawa naman ng Abu Sayyaf, once they engage criminal activities like kidnapping, pag nahabol sila ng government, if they're about to be captured by government forces, pumapasok sila sa MNLF camp and declare themselves that they are MNLF members. So, hindi na ngayon mapapasok ng government because of the existing peace agreement. Just like what had happened in Maguindanao during the Mama Sapano incident, wherein one of the terrorist group, the known international terrorist group, were hiding refuge in the territory of the MILF. Kaya nagkaroon ng insertion, special operations doon sa area. Kaso lang, nagkaroon ng medyo aberya during the conduct of the operations. Kaya yung government forces natin, yung members of the Philippine National Police Special Action Force, SOCOM casualties of 44 sub-members. So dahil ngayon nga one of the issues that came out is they failed to coordinate with the MILF, and they failed to coordinate with the local troops in the area. So kaya nga they suffered heavier casualties. Now what about the communist terrorist movement? The objective of the communist terrorist movement is to topple the present administration and transform democratic form of government into communism. So ito na naman ngayon, one of the threat group is about the communist terrorist movements. So ang pinaka-objective naman, again, the communist terrorist movements or the CPP-NPA is a political enemy of the state because their objective is to topple or change the present state of government into a communism government. So kaya nga, they are considered as political enemy of the state. We have been fighting with this group for over 50 years, more than 50 years until now the time. But ngayon, hindi na masyado silang na-felt, but still, they are still in operations. But because of the program of the government, and the local terrorist movements in the area wherein the local government unit was empowered to address. Kasi dati, when we talk about national peace accord or national yung peace agreement, it's normally being taken care by a national government. Pero ngayon, with the present approach na mas nakita nila na it is more effective if local government units will handle the peace agreement. So kaya nga mayroon silang effort ngayon about the communist terrorist movements. Now, what are the strategy and tactics of the communist terrorists or the CPP-NPA? They use landmines as weapon to ensure maximum damage to the government. So makita natin na mayroon silang mga bombings, but itong terrorist movements and the communist terrorists or the CPP-NPA normally doesn't attack civilian entities or civilian communities. They normally attack government forces, but then they're using the community, the civilian community, as their instrument of fund generations. Now, they also conduct recovery and expansions in coastal areas to facilitate inter-island movement. In Mindanao, there were reports that they are, yun nga kanina, as I have said a while ago, that they had established alliance with the MILF. But it was not confirmed until such time na itong mga NPA nagkaroon ng change of command din sa kanila that it was not materialized. Then the use of AAP and PNP camouflage uniform in conducting raids to avoid detection. NPA is not so much being felt in Zamboanga Peninsula, especially in Zamboanga City to Basulta area because of its geographical locations. NPA tribe somewhere in the northern part of the peninsula and in central Mindanao towards eastern Mindanao. Kaya nga in Surigao, in Davao de Oro, in Davao areas, in Davao regions, doon natin talaga ma-feel yung operations ng CPP-NPA. Now, when I was assigned in Davao as the Deputy Regional Director for Operations, the first casualty that I experienced was when the second platoon of the Davao del Norte Mobile Force Company was attacked and harassed by a group of CPP-NPA. Hindi ko naman akalain, because it was my first time to be there in that area, hindi ko naman akalain na yung CPP-NPA pala go to the extent of operating in built-up areas. But here in Zamboanga Peninsula, the difference is, if you talk about CPP-NPA, nasa bundok lang sila, nasa bundok. But in Davao region towards Surigao region, nasa built-up areas sila nag-ooperate. So they are actually operating in built-up areas. What do I mean by built-out areas? Yung mga maraming tao, maraming bahay, maraming residente, they are operating. Kaya ganun sila katindi doon in that particular regions. Then, yun nga ginagamit nila yung AAP and PNP uniform in order to hide their identity. So that is some sort of their tactics in attacking or harassing vital installations of the government, like installations or AAP camps and PNP camps and stations. Now, counter AAP's is the team establishing local chapter of CPP-NP Aligned Party List Group. So, ang AAP naman, kina-counter nila into by way of special operation teams. Yung movements nila, instead of using armed component of the government to attack a CPP-NPA, they use yung special operations team through PCR activities in civil activities. They also maintain tactical alliance with the MILF for logistics and training. So there were reports that they have established tactical alliances with the MILF. Now, the legal structure of the Communist Terrorist Movement or the CPP-NPA is in the white area, yung white area na tinatawag natin, these are areas wherein armed component, kasi the organization of the CPP-NPA, mayroon silang political component, mayroon silang armed component, at mayroon naman silang mga propagandists, yung legal front nila, legal front. So the CPP or the Communist Party of the Philippines is the political component. The NDF, the National Democratic Front, is a legitimate front of the CPP-NPA, and the armed component, which is the New People's Army. Pag sinasabi natin na white area, the white area, hindi mo ma-feel yung armed component ng CPP-NPA. So, yung sa legal struggles nila, the White Area Committee supervises the ideological, political, and organizational works in the different sectoral groups in the urban areas. In fact, one of the issues now ngayon in Senate or in Congress is about yung red tagging. Because some of the supporters or groups that are now in Senate or in Congress that are representing a political party or representing a party list who are now sitting as congressman in the Senate, kaya nga nagkaroon sila ng issue doon because most of these legal fronts nila, like yung yung Alliance of Concerned Teachers, yung Makabayan Blocks. So these are practically legal fronts of the CPP-NPA, and this, ang purpose nila is for purposes of recruitment and political propaganda. The white area is tasked to conduct mass campaign strategies, forge alliances with different sectoral groups, undertake recruitment and political education. Recently, there was report that the recruitment of the CPP-NPA is already in some of the universities in Metro Manila, universities and colleges where they recruit young students to join the group. So yun yung trabaho ng legal front nila. But they cannot be arrested also because actually, by the word itself as legal front, they are not actually criminals, but they are still part and members of the organization of the CPP-NPA that are undertaking the legal front activities of the organization. Now, what are the sources of funds and logistics? Again, extortion is one of their viable sources of funds. Ano yung sino-sino yung ina-extort? In Davao region alone, they're extorting or getting some support coming from big banana plantation companies in the Davao regions. Mining is another sources of their extortion activities in other companies that are operating in Davao regions. Then Vestis Ventures, they also ventures in some legal business, but actually the support or the money generated from that legal business are being shifted to the organization to support their activities. Now, cooperatives, not all of cooperatives are siding with the government. They form as a cooperative as their legal fronts. So pag nakita natin, they are illegitimate cooperatives. But actually, beyond or below that is supporting the movements of the CPP-NPA. Now, another one is robbery hold-up. Robbery hold-up is another form of fund generations being undertaken by the communist terrorist movements. Now, we will be going now to terrorism. What is terrorism? Terrorism is a premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against non-combatant targets by subnational groups or clandestine agent usually intended to influence an audience. So dito, it's a premeditated, it's a plan, it is a politically motivated, then they use violence as their means to scare other people, and mostly the target are non-combatant. Kaya nga dito sa atin, way back in the 90s and early 20s, yung mga kasagsagan na bombing dito sa atin sa Zamboanga was not really intended for a military camps, for a police station, but it's done in churches, in malls, in terminals, in ports where people converge and they conduct bombing. The purpose there is not, the target is not really addressed into the victims. The purpose of bombing is addressing the third audience, yung taong nanonood dun sa terroristic activities nila. Yun yung mga target nila na tinatakot. Kasi definitely, pag yung biktima na namatay, hindi na natatakot kasi patay na. But ang natatakot ngayon ay yung larger community who are non-combatants. So that is terrorism. It is a premeditated and then it is politically motivated violence that they go to the extent of scaring people in order to perpetuate their objectives. Now, what are the examples of national security threat dimensions? We have political. So sa political naman, it's about terrorism, nuclear bombs like 911 type of incident, the reservoir poisoning, the sabotage in MRT, LRT. Kaya itong MRT, LRT, if we can remember this way back in the 90s, wherein yung grupo ng terrorist group converts that they bombed the LRT. It was a Valentine bombing. Then we have also another dimension is about economics. So what are those threats to national security with regards to economics? Mayroon tayong cyber terrorism, the use of internets, then sabotage of cell phone communications, the use of fake bills and smuggling. So these are terrorist activities that is they directly affecting our economic growth and development. Then we have also the socio-cultural dimensions, wherein it increase in the use of illegal drug, shame of being Filipino, rise of gambling. So use of illegal drugs, kaya nga when the president has assumed his presidency and assumed the post of being a president, ang pinakauna na ina-address niya is illegal drugs. Kasi alam niya na ang drugs will really affect our socio-cultural activities. Kaya nga it will affect especially the youth. Kasi ang target naman ng illegal drugs are dedicated or targeting the youth. Then we have also the environmental and health. Ito kaya katulad ngayon sa environmental and health, katulad ng pandemic ngayon with regards to coronavirus. So isa yan sa mga threat to national security. In fact, our economy in the Philippines was adversely being affected with the pandemic. Kaya nga marami talagang nagugutom, maraming nawalan ng trabaho, maraming namamatay, maraming it really affects our economic growth and development because of the cessations of economic activities, especially yung sa transport sector. Isa yon sa naapektuhan, yung transport sector, yung sa tourism sector, yung sa construction sector. So these are the things that were primarily being affected with the pandemics. Now, another dimension is military. The military, it involves kodita, rampant involvement of soldiers in crimes, and one is yung corruption in the military. Kaya ka nagkaroon tayo, one of the basic reason, way back in 1980s or late 80s towards the early 90s, the kodita is very much popular that time. In fact, the installation of the presidency of Cory Aquino was through armed movements. The presidency of Gloria Magpagal Arroyo was also another form of armed movement in order to topple the present administrations. So ito yun sa mga issues about national security wherein military are involved. Now the basic reasons why these people, these young military officials or PNP officials were involved in planning of kodita because of corruptions. So isa yan sa mga threat to national security. Now there are two kinds of terrorists. We have the international terrorist group, which is a group of terrorists whose area of operation transcend from one territorial boundary to another. So again, what was very popular recently was about the ISIS, the existence of ISIS in our area. In fact, the siege in Marawi City was being inspired by ISIS. Although the local terrorist group were local, but they were inspired by ISIS. They were doing establishes alliance with the ISIS. So kaya nga ganun katindi yung epekto ng siege sa Marawi. Then we have the domestic terrorists. It is a terrorist group whose area of operation is limited only in one's own country and does not transcend other territorial boundaries. However, can possibly be exploited by international terrorist group for the attainment of their objective. So, yun nga yung example ko that the Mauti group were inspired by the ISIS in order to establish an Islamic caliphate in Marawi City. Kaya nga, nung sinuportahan sila ng ISIS, ganun katindi yung epekto nung nangyari sa Marawi. So again, there are two kinds of terrorists, international terrorists and the domestic terrorists. So international terrorists, that means it is a terrorist group that are coming from other countries that are getting into our area of responsibility and support local or domestic terrorist group. What are the characteristics of a terrorist? Unang-una, they promote fear. Kaya nga yung sabi ko kanina, the most common instrument or tools being used by the terrorist group in order to promote fear is by bombings. bombings dedicated or addressed towards a civilian community. Because the target is not really the target itself, but the target for fear are those third audience or other group of communities that is looking into the incident that is being affected by fear. So, yung mga biktima, hindi gaano kasi wala na, yung iba namatay na, so hindi na matatakot. But ang natatakot na yun, yung nanonood dun sa violence that was perpetrated by the terrorist group. Another characteristic of this group is usually military weaker than the opposing security force. So, hindi sila gaano katindi or kalakas. Wala sila gaanong kalakasan at par with a military organizations. So, kaya nga ang ginagawa nila is they undertake violence through a treacherous methods. Kaya hindi naman sila umatake ng military camp, hindi naman sila umaatake ng bigger military camps or police camps, but they are attacking helpless civilians. Now, another characteristic of terrorists is they are highly mobile. Kaya nga kung minsan, yung grupo ng Abu Sayyaf nakikita natin sa Sulu, nakikita natin sa Basilan, nakikita natin sa northern part or northern or eastern part of the peninsula, nakikita din natin somewhere in the Sibugay area, in Zamboanga del Sur area. So they are highly mobile. Kaya nga, pinning them down, just like kahit ilang divisions or battalions that we are sending to Sulu area, to Basulta area, hindi pa rin sila naubos-ubos because some of them are already no longer in the area. Most of them are already in some areas in the peninsula where they are seeking refuge to their relatives and living as an ordinary citizens in the area. So they are very highly mobile. They don't really establish a fixed camp wherein pag inatake ng military, wala na, tapos na. But then because of their nature that they are highly mobile, they go from one place to the other. So medyo yan yung isa sa mga kahirapan na nag-suffer yung security forces natin. Then they exploit the fact that terror is cheap. What does it mean when we said terror is cheap? Ako, if I am a terrorist and then I just explode 100 grenade and then produces of about 4 to 5 casualties, isang granada lang, how much would it cost? Siguro malaki na yung 20,000. But the impact of that incident is global. It transcends from one area or territory to the other. So, hindi siya masyadong magastos. Unlike if you'll be using human or armed component or armed group to act as terrorists, attack camps, take under siege community, medyo magastos yun. Magastos like what had happened here in Zamboanga City wherein the group of the Miswari group had conducted siege. In fact, there was already twice na ang nangyari dito sa Zamboanga City. The first one is in Kabatangan and the second one was in 2013 in Barangay Riondo area, Riondo and Santa Barbara area. So that was already the second time. So it is very expensive because you have to utilize people. Now when you utilize number of people, you will be supporting them in terms of logistics like food packs and other personal gamit ng mga tao. So very expensive. Unlike yung bombing, sandali lang. You just invent and improvise explosive device and then have it exploded in one areas, in vital areas in the city, then it goes. Kaya medyo. Now, one of the characteristic again is possess limited resources. Kaya nga, wala silang gaanong sufficiently or abundant resources. Operate most often undercover. So, they are hidden. They don't operate they don't being felt by in an area, but they operate undercover in the community. Believe that small group is secured and efficient. So terrorists believe that small group is more efficient than a larger group. So that is the characteristic of a terrorist. Now, what are the goals of the terrorist? of course, they have their immediate and long-term goals. Now, one of the identified immediate goals is obtain worldwide, national, or local recognition for their cause. So, kailangan nila ng attention locally and globally. So, yun yung immediate goal nila. Just like what had happened to 9/11. The impact of 9/11 was not only being affected in the mainland US or in America, but the effect or the extent of the effect of the 9/11 incident was global, so international. Then another immediate goal is harass, weaken, or embarrass government, military, or police forces. So pag nagharas sila ng military camps or PNP installations, that is basically to embarrass government. Another one is show government inability to protect its citizenry. Kaya nga pag ang isang military camp was being attacked and then being captured by the terrorist group. So how could this group or the military can protect the civilian na sila nga mismo ay na-atake? So that is their objective, that is their goal. Just to show that inability that the government or the military is wala silang ability to protect the citizenry. So yun lang ang pinaka-immediate goal nila. Then obtain money or equipment. So sometimes they conduct violence or threat or intimidations in order to obtain money to support their activities. Then disrupt or destroy means of mobility or communications. That just like bombing communication lines, towers of our communication facilities, bombing or destroying some communication facilities. So just to destroy, just to enable us to communicate properly. So isa yan sa mga immediate goals nila. Then also to demonstrate power or threat credibility. So if they can do that, they are now demonstrating that they are more powerful than the government. Then prevent or delay executive decisions or legislations. Sometimes, some goals of the terrorists is to prevent. Like itong peace talk, the ongoing peace talk. Ngayon nagkaroon na tayo ng Bangsamoro Basic Law. What had happened in Sulu? Bombings. Now this group, the purpose and the goal of this group is to prevent the execution or delay the executions or implementations of that law. Kaya nga, sometimes the purpose of this group is to demonstrate that they are still a group of people or group among them that is not in conformity with the present solution that was being undertaken by the government. Then they also cause strikes or work slowdown. So pag nagkaroon ng hostage taking, pag nagkaroon ng siege, just like what we had experienced here in Zamboanga, again way back in 2013, whereby practically there was a cessation of economic activities. All bazaars, all commercial establishments were closed, all movements of transport were seized because of the ongoing siege. So there is a disruptions of economic activities. Again, other immediate goals by the terrorist group is discourage impending foreign investment or foreign government assistance program. Now, if I can remember, way back in 1985, wherein there was already a massive activities of opening the BIMP IAGA or the Economic Corridor here in Zamboanga Peninsula that involves Indonesia, Malaysia. So mag-open sana ng economic corridor or magkaroon ng wala nang boundary as far as economic activities. But there are some groups that they really wanted to disrupt the implementations of these kasi maapektuhan yung kanilang mga negosyo. What they did here in Zamboanga City was to make a series of bombings activities in order to some investors to shy away of investing here in Zamboanga City because of security threat. Kaya nga, that was during the time of Mayo Agan, wherein we experienced here a series of bombings that started around 12 o'clock in the evening up to 12 o'clock in the noon. So, that was series of bombing. So, some investors who came in to scout for a possible business site, nag-withdraw sila because, of course, one of the reason is their safety and security is not being secured here in this area because of the series of bombings. The other one is to influence election or free prisoners. So that is some of the examples of an immediate goal of a terrorist. Now we will be going to the long-range goal of a terrorist. A long-range goal of a terrorist is to cause dramatic changes in government, such as revolution, civil war, or war between nations. So that is long range, just like the CPP and PA movements. It is a long range. It is a protracted war that was done by the CPP and NPA in order to have a dramatic change of government, a government to transform a democratic form of government into a communist form of government. So ang fight ngayon, kaya nga palagi sinasabi ni Presidente na tumanda na lang yung founder ng CPP-NPA, pati siya, matanda na sila, hindi pa rin natapos-tapos yung bangian ng dalawang pwersa, the Communist Party and as well as the Republic of the Philippines. So it is a long range goal. Now, influence local, national, or international policy decisions. So sometimes, it influence decisions that has something to do with international policies or national policies. Now, it also gained political recognition as the legal body representing an ethnic, religious, political, or ideological group. Just like itong mga sa insurgency part naman, yung sa CPP-NPA, ang ginagamit nila ay yung indigenous people, yung mga lumad. Normally, some of the hardcore members of the CPP-NPA are the lumads because they have no other options. Kasi doon sila sa bundok and then they're being used by the CPP-NPA in order to form as an armed component of the organizations. The Muslim group or the MILF also are coming from the Muslim groups and the MNLF, and including the Abu Sayyaf. So these are to gain a political recognitions, examples of gaining political recognitions to represent a particular ethnic groups. Now, what are the terrorist tactics? We have bombing, arson, hijacking, and assassination and liquidations. So these are tactics that are being employed by a terrorist. Bombing which is the most frequently used terrorist act as explosive as their means of destroying life and property for the attainment of their goals and objectives. So again, bombing is intended not to the victim themselves, but intended to the third audience who are viewing the violence that affects the safety and security of the peaceful community. Arson is another form, like burning heavy equipments of the government or construction workers. So, isa yan sa mga acts of terrorism in order to delay economic growth and development or to destroy economic activities. So, just like not so much being felt here in Zamboanga Peninsula, but in Davao regions towards northern Mindanao, it is very, very common doon na sinusunog yung mga bulldozers, mga dump trucks that are undertaking road constructions, graders. So sinusunog nila in order to delay government project, especially nowadays that the government has entered into a build program. But the NPA also is conducting atrocities by burning heavy equipments that are owned by the contractors. Hijacking is another act of terrorists. They use tactics in penetrating or gaining entry into military, police, government installations. So hijacking. Then assassination of leaders, government leaders is another form of a terrorist tactics. Ambush is another form of a terrorist tactics. So this is a kind of tactics that are being employed by a terrorist group, maybe assassinating or ambushing military commanders or any top government officials. Kidnapping is another tactics of a terrorist group, but the kidnapping is also a means of generating income or generating funds out of the ransom that are being paid to the terrorist group. Hostage taking. This is a kind of terrorist actions who openly hold the victim while confronting the authorities that produces a cinematic effect on their actions and demands. So dito, during the siege, of course, ma-identify natin that there was really a massive hostage taking. During the 2013 siege in Zamboanga City, I was one of those who was assigned to be to spearhead the negotiation team. So we were able to negotiate to surrender 2 commanders and liberate hostages. And then later on, hindi rin nagkaintindihan kasi there were a lot of political priorities that sometimes the peaceful means of negotiation were not given privilege to negotiate with the terrorists or the group of the hostage takers. So, kaya nagkaroon ng hindi nag-prosper. Then another terrorist tactics is robbery and extortion. A tactics used to coerce people to generate financial support to their cause. So, robbery or extortion, intimidating business sectors in order to give money to support their activities. So basically, those are some of the terrorist tactics. Okay, so we will be going now to a detailed understanding of kidnapping for ransom. Of course, kidnapping for ransom is an organized group that are highly profiled, syndicated. Of course, being penetrated by the CPP-NPA, the Abu Sayyaf, and other professional kidnapping groups, employing an intricate modus operandi. So, kidnapping is a form of terrorist actions or terrorist activities to generate funds. So, this is how they are being structured. They have a leader, they have some financiers, then they have a negotiators, and then they have an abductors group. Then they have a Pogo group. The Pogo group are the ones holding the victims. The payoff group, the ones that are receiving the ransom, if ever there are already ransom that is going to be paid. And then they have also a group that is in charge of the security and monitoring. So this is how they are structured, the KFRG or the Kidnapping for Ransom Group. So their sequence of targeting or executing a kidnapping is, first, they undertake target acquisition. Kung sino yung tina-target, inaalam muna nila those who has the potential to pay a ransom. So nagkaroon sila ng extensive background investigations on the individual target for kidnapping. Kaya kung minsan, yung mga target nila, sometimes ay hindi na yung target mismo ang nakukuha because of maybe of mistaken identity na hindi pala yun ang mayaman, yung palang iba. So, first is they go on background investigation. But because maybe of some deficiencies in the conduct of background investigation they undertook, sometimes it results to a negative outcome. Now, the group recruits and identify individual who has substantial knowledge and access to the target finances and is promised a percentage share for a successful operations. Now, this is how this kidnapper for ransom do their things. They don't exactly, pag ikaw yung kidnapper, you don't exactly go right to the target, but they recruit some members or any person that has an access to the financial status of the victim or that has access to the family members. So, nire-recruit nila. Now, let me cite you some example wherein sometimes ang pinaka-target na nire-recruit nila are security guards. Now, alam natin na security guards, magkano lang naman yung kinikita ng security guards. So, the security guards are the potential target for recruitment by the kidnappers because they can allure the security guard of higher pay if they succeeded in the kidnapping of yung sa boss niya. So, kaminsan, yung mga kasambahay, yung mga katulong, kuminsan yun tinatarget nila in order to be able to penetrate or have the access of knowing the financial status of the victim. Now, to be considered as a kidnap prospect, an individual must be capable of paying at least 3 million to 5 million peso. So, yun yung mga prospect nila. Yun yung mga potential targets. Conduct of extensive casing and surveillance and deployment of persons to get information. So, conduct of recruitment, casing, and surveillance. When we talk about casing and surveillance, it is an activity undertaken by a kidnappers. Casing, it means na sinosurvey yung mga target area. Sinosurvey nila. Tinitingnan nila yung bahay, yung workplace, yung daily route ng victims. So yun yung activities na ginagawa ng mga kidnappers. Then after that, pag natapos yung mga activities na yon, they go now to planning. After thorough surveillance and casing has been established, the group now plans to execute of the abduction, including the main player, shall be discussed, brainstorm, and etc. Compartmentalization need to know basis is highly observed by the group. So, magpaplano na sila after getting all informations or data that through surveillance and casing. Then on the abduction phase, this is the implementation of the plan activities wherein the target will be kidnapped and brought to their pre-designated places. Usually car blockades or gunpoint, abduct their victim, transfer him to other vehicles or even within his vehicle. One of the example here is the kidnapping of Mr. Ong, whereby they uses their own vehicle to serve as a getaway. So kung minsan, mayroon silang bikulo na hinahire nila or they will be using the same vehicle owned by the victim. Then monitoring and negotiation phase. During this stage, the group then divides or split into different subgroupings. One group shall monitor police actions, whether the case has been referred to the police authorities by the family of the victim. This is to be able to know the courses of actions by the law enforcement agencies. Another group shall compose the negotiation team, wherein they make contact with the family of the victim and make the necessary negotiations on the amount of money to be given to the abductors. Then here comes another group shall be posted to conduct monitor the activities of the family to ensure that the family of the victim will not report the incident to the authority. One of the conditions, especially in kidnapping, is to intimidate the family of the victim not to report to authorities. Isa talaga yan sa mga preconditions nila during the conduct of negotiation. So payoff, ito na yung bayaran. The payoff after everything has been set, the family of the victim will be informed about the drop-off point for the payoff. At this juncture, security preparation is also set up by the group in a designated persons or group to get the ransom shall be informed. So, may designated area sila. Just like the kidnapping of an Australian citizen in Ipil, wherein during the process of negotiation, our informant says the negotiation will take place in Lamitan. But it was just a ploy that negotiation will take place in Lamitan. So we were waiting for about 8 hours to release the victim. But we seems to be frustrated at the time because we have not heard any report coming from the insiders that the victim was already released. So until such time that we waited up to 4 o'clock at dawn, and then there was an information coming na yung victim pala, doon ang bayaran sa Basilan, doon naman ang release sa Pagadian. So ganon sila katindi mag-undertake ng strategic or tactics during the conduct of payoff. Then release or liquidation phase. Pag hindi naman nakabayad yung biktima, they resorted sometimes to liquidations or releasing, either release or liquidation pag hindi nakabayad. So after the ransom has been given to the abductors, the victim will either be released or liquidated at a designated area, after which his family will be notified. So ito example, yung kay Bacala KFR and with double murder of Dr. Elmer Avenida and Roy San Pedro. So these are some cases of kidnapping for ransom wherein the victim was executed. Okay, so that rounds up my presentation for this afternoon, and if there are some questions, okay. I have to get back to my prior slides. Okay, it is me. I am a retired police officer. Of course, with a criminology degree and master's degree in criminology, and also in public administrations and public safety. And for my law enforcement service schoolings, I have my local schoolings. Ito lang yung mailagay sa screen. And foreign schooling, especially, most of my foreign schoolings are more on terrorism, just like the street encounter survival training, which I took in Louisiana, USA, and then another is the International Terrorist Investigation course in Albuquerque, New Mexico, also in USA. Then the Vital Installation Security course in USA also, and then executive role in counterterrorism in Bangkok, Thailand. So these are some of my foreign schoolings. In my affiliations, involvement in some organizations, domestically, I am also a member of the Professional Criminology Associations of the Philippines, then the Philippine Educators Associations of the Criminology Educations, being also a graduate of being a criminologist, so I have to be member of those associations. Then Executive Combat Shooters, Lahim Mosa Gun Club, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Association of the Philippines, then the Cooperative Sampen, and the YAB team member. For international membership, pero hindi ko na rin ito na-update, International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators, the International Association of Chief of Police, and International Toastmasters Club. So these are my involvement in some civic organizations. And position held, medyo marami-rami. So there are so many positions that I've held during my service, being a chief of police, but most often of my assignment is more in investigation, intelligence, and operations. So those are in my career, the main career in the PNP, in the Philippine National Police, for serving the government for 33 years. In government, mostly of my operations is more on intelligence operations and those that are directly involved in terrorism. And then for my last positions, provincial director, and then operations officers, and then now that I had retired from the service but not yet fully retired, so I am presently the president of the Police Retirees Association Incorporated of Zamboanga chapter, or sa Region 9 chapter, then the advisory council of PRO 9, then also an advisory council of the Regional Maritime Unit 9, and the advisory council also of the 9th Regional Special Training Unit of the Philippine National Police. So those are practically my qualification as your resource speaker for this afternoon, and now engaging in some little business in order to help out survive. So do we still have other questions? So okay, so we're done. Thank you very much for listening, and if you still have some questions, you may refer to your coordinator, and your coordinator may get in touch with me, and perhaps I can get in touch to you personally if you have some doubts and queries about terrorism and other threat to national security. Once again, your resource person for this afternoon is retired Police General Jose Bayani Gucela, and a resident of Zamboanga City. Thank you very much, and good afternoon again.
Blended learning is a way of teaching that
Sa
combines
ilalim ng new normal, naglatag ang Department of Education ng mga paraan para may pagpatuloy pa rin ng kabataan ang kanilang pag-aaral kahit nasa loob ng tahanan.
We now call it blended learning. One, there will be printed material. And the second approach, online learning platform. Those homes which do not necessarily have connectivity